series of lectures was on the lesions of cervix and vulva. And today we do the second session on diseases of the uterus and the endometrium. So as majority of you have joined, I will start the session. I hope it is time. We are already there. It's time by my watch. So we will start on the sessions of the diseases of the uterus and the endometrium. I'm Dr. Neeta Khurana speaking for all the students over here. So you have already read about the uterus and the endometrium, the physiology and the normal anatomy of it. And you know that the endometrial histology varies according to the phase of the endometrium, which it gets continually stimulated by the hormones. In the initial phase, immediately after the menstrual cycle, it is under the influence of the estrogen. When it shows a proliferative phase, the glands and the stroma are proliferating. So there are long tubular glands, and after the ovulation, it is the progesterone which has the effect on the stroma as well as the glands, leading to secretory changes in the glands. And at the end of the 28th day, there is decrease in both the hormones, the estrogens and the progesterone. As a result, it gets denuded monthly of its mucosa, and that is the menstrual cycle. So the usual average menstrual cycle is of approximately 27 to 30 days, and commonly it is a 28-day period which is there. The other changes which occur in the endometrium and the uterus is because of the pregnancy which occurs, and it harbors the fetus and leads the fetus to grow into a young neonate. And after the delivery also, it will take some time for the hyperplasia and hypertrophy of the uterine smooth muscle cells to come back to normal. So there will be a slight increase in the size of the uterus of a nulliparous woman, a woman who has never had a baby, as compared to a woman who has had a baby, which would be a little larger in size. Right? So though majority of the time it comes back to near normal, but it's just a slightly larger. So it is prone to disorders of the endometrium. It is prone to disorders of the myometrium, which is formed of smooth muscle cells. These are the two important conditions that we will study about and learn today together. So the disorders which are occurred because of the hormonal imbalances, the disorders which occur, the changes which occur in the uterus because of the pregnancy, and any other disorders which we can see in the uterus and the endometrium because of the neoplasm occurring. So as we can recollect the normal histology, this is the surface lining of the endometrium in the proliferative phase, which is a long columnar, tall columnar epithelium. And so are the glands, which are tubular glands dispersed in a compact stroma. So these tubular glands are lined by tall columnar epithelial cells with a pink cytoplasm. The nuclei are oriented perpendicular to the basement membrane, and the stroma is composed of small oval cells which are lying close to each other. So this is a very compact stroma which occurs. Then this is the high power view, and in this we can say the evidence of proliferation is in the form of mitosis seen in both the glandular epithelium as well as the stromal epithelium. So when there is proliferation, there is increase in the number of glands, and so we can see the mitotic activity in the glands in the proliferative endometrium in both the stroma as well as in the glands. The stromal cells are small oval cells with a scanty rim of cytoplasm, while the glandular epithelial cells in the proliferative phase are tall columnar with nuclei oriented perpendicular to the basement. When ovulation occurs, the first sign of ovulation, which we can see by the day 17 of the menstrual cycle, starting day 1 as the first day of the menstruation period. So this is the change which occurs. Beneath the nucleus, you can see certain vacuolations. So these are the secretions which accumulate beneath the nucleus, and they are seen as the subnuclear vacuolation. So this is an indication, and we call it an early secretory phase, and this is a direct indicator of the ovulation having occurred in this woman. The stroma shows an edema leading to separation of these cells from each other by the pink edematous fluid, and the cells become separated from each other. You can see space which is occurring between the nuclei of the stromal cells, and the stromal cells will also start having more amount of cytoplasm as compared to the scanty cytoplasm which was seen in the proliferative phase. And this is what we used to draw in our histology books, in our histology files, as the secretory endometrium. You can see the glands with the tortuous appearance. These cells are all tortuous coming into the lumina, and this lumina has this pink secretory material which is inside it, and the stromal cells have more amount of cytoplasm. So there will be abundant amount of cytoplasm in the stromal cells. The glandular lumina will start showing secretions, and there is tortuosity of the glands, which are seen in the late secretory phase, starting from day 24 to day 28 of the endometrial cycle. And by 28th day, there will be some evidence of shedding which will start of the menstrual period when granulocytes which come inside it. Right? So these are the areas when granulocytes will come inside it. Mansi has said that she cannot hear it. The others can hear it. So Mansi, please check on your side whether there is any problem on your system. Right? So coming on to the diseases of the endometrium, we will discuss the neoplasms, we will discuss the inflammation. These will be the two important conditions which we will be discussing. And as we know, the uterine inflammation or the endometrial inflammation will be called as the endometritis. And all itis, it would be either acute itis, which will be the acute inflammation, or chronic inflammation, which we will call as the chronic endometritis. Uncommonly, myometrium gets affected by inflammation. It is usually resistant to inflammation, while acute endometritis can occur in conditions of post-abortal phase, or if there has been any intervention into the uterus, say an infected catheter has been put into it, or the patient was pregnant and she got her abortion done at a site where aseptic precautions, all conditions for asepsis were not used. So then the patient can have acute endometritis, or there could be an ascending inflammation from the vagina, which will go on to the cervix, and then it goes on to the endometrium. So there could be ascending inflammation occurring going from vagina, which will be acute vaginitis. The inflammation may spread on to cervix, which will be acute cervicitis, and then it may go upwards into the endometrium, leading to acute endometritis. This could be because of the poor hygiene when these conditions may occur, or because of any infectious material which you have been using, or infected pads which the woman has used, or if it is an infected tampons which have been used, or she kept the tampon and she forgot about it. You have not removed the tampon at all. Fine. So in those conditions, the acute endometritis can occur, and that could be because of the pus-forming bacteria or gram-negative bacteria. Both staphylococci as well as the gram-negative bacteria, E. coli and all, can lead to acute endometritis. Chronic persistent inflammation is called as the chronic endometritis. While in acute endometritis, you see neutrophilic infiltrate. In chronic endometritis, we will get to see plasma cells and macrophages. So remember, lymphocytes can normally occur in the endometrium, but presence of plasma cells and macrophages indicates that there is chronic inflammation in the endometrium, and that can occur in the post-abortal phase, after the delivery, when the trauma has occurred of the delivery, and that will lead to presence of this, the bacteria will get a chance to grow over there. Or there is a forgotten intrauterine contraceptive device which has been there for many years, and that can lead to prone to inflammation, especially the thread which is hanging down into the vagina. So that could be a carrier of infection from the vagina to the cervix and to the endometrium. And that can later on even spread onto bilateral tubes and ovaries, leading to acute salpingitis, chronic salpingitis, and oophorytis. So sometimes even salpingo-oophorytis may occur by chronic inflammation. Of course, in India, in cases of disseminated tuberculosis, we may have even tubercular endometritis, when apart from lymphocytes and plasma cells, we will get epithelioid cell granulomas. I hope you are there with me now. And there, so that is okay with you. So one can look out for those cells. So yes, if you are okay, then we can progress on to more. So in cases of tubercular endometritis, we will find epithelioid cell granulomas, and if they are showing caseation, we are confirmed that it is tuberculosis. The rest confirmation can be done by doing the Ziel-Nielsen stain for acid-fast bacilli, on which we can get acid-fast bacilli, which will be seen as red colored rods within the caseate necrotic material and within the macrophages. In case we are unable to demonstrate acid-fast bacilli, it is always recommended to do a culture for tubercular Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So when the biopsy is being taken to see, endometrial biopsy is being taken to look for evidence of inflammation, a small bit of the biopsy or the menstrual fluid should also be sent for culture for Mycobacterium tuberculosis or routine bacterial culture if there is chronic endometritis to find out which are the organisms which are causing the inflammation, the sensitivity to which antibiotics, so that an appropriate treatment can be started. So now what do these patients with acute or chronic endometritis present with? As it is affecting the endometrium, so it will shed, so there will be abnormal uterine bleeding. So abnormal uterine bleeding, intermenstrual bleeding, especially associated with pelvic pain or low back pain, presence of discharge per vaginum draining out from the endometrial cavity to the cervix and from the external os into the vagina. The patient may just present with a per vaginal foul smelling discharge, constitutional symptoms of acute inflammation, systemic symptoms of acute inflammation in the form of high fever, which can be low grade fever in cases of tuberculosis or high grade fevers in cases of pus forming bacteria. And if it leads to fibrosis, irregularity of the endometrial lining, then the patient may even present with infertility, especially in cases of tubercular salpingitis, which may lead to stricture formation of the fallopian tube. So the ova will not be able to pass till the endometrial cavity to be able to fertilize it. So those patients may present for fertility, and many cases of tubercular endometritis may be diagnosed when you are investigating a patient for infertility. She is unable to conceive. The reason could be blockage of both the fallopian tubes due to tubercular strictures occurring over there. Right? So this was about the acute and the chronic inflammation. Here we can see an endometrial gland which is filled with the pus cells or neutrophils, and the same pus cells are seen in the endometrial stroma also. So in such conditions, we will call it acute endometritis. Fine. And in chronic endometritis, we will find the presence of plasma cells in the endometrial stroma and sometimes even going into the glands and destroying the glands. So you can identify the plasma cells by the oval cells with an eccentrically placed nucleus with a cartwheel appearance, a perinuclear halo because it has a prominent Golgi apparatus, and the dense pink eosinophilic cytoplasm. So here we can see large number of plasma cells in the stroma, which are indicative of chronic non-specific endometritis occurring over here. And one should always do a culture and find out which are the organisms responsible so that appropriate antibiotic therapy can be given and treat these patients an easily treatable cause of infertility and abnormal uterine bleeding. So you will not require anything more than endometritis, more than antibiotic therapy. So here also you can see large number of plasma cells which are present over here in the endometrial stroma. These are the tubular endometrial glands which are present. So the stroma attains a spindled out fibroblastic appearance due to chronic inflammation occurring over here. Here we can find the specific type of chronic endometritis. We can see the epithelioid cell granuloma. So these are large pink cells with abundant cytoplasm, a slipper-shaped nuclei, and presence of these multinucleated Langhans type of giant cells with polar arrangement of nuclei. So this gives you an indicator that you are looking at the granulomatous endometritis. And here we can see that this is the endometrial glands. These are the multiple epithelioid cell granulomas. One of these granulomas has a multinucleated giant cells with polar arrangement of the cytoplasm. So this is a granulomatous endometritis. We always do a Zeal-Nielsen stain to look for tubercular bacilli and always send it for culture for Mycobacterium tuberculosis, which will give you a confirmation in case you are not seeing caseation. Here we can see abundant amount of caseous necrotic material. So if you are definitely seeing the caseation, one can directly call it tubercular endometritis and directly the anti-tubercular treatment can be started or ATT to these patients can be given. Right? So these are the conditions which will lead to endometritis. Now a similar appearing term is endometriosis. While endometritis is inflammation of the endometrial glands and stroma, endometriosis is a condition in which the endometrial glands and stroma are present in locations outside the uterus. Normally, when we say that there is a gland or stroma or any component of a tissue present outside that location, we call it metastasis. But then we use the term metastasis in cases of malignant conditions. Here, they are present normal benign endometrial glands, benign endometrial stroma, both would be present in a location outside the uterus. Now, where do they commonly occur? So there is no inflammation over here. It is only ectopic presence of endometrial glands and stroma rather than present only in the lining of the endometrium. They have gone beyond the uterus and they have found a site which could be pouch of Douglas. They can be there in the ovaries. They can be there in the walls of the fallopian tube, in the walls of the urinary bladder. They can be there in the pelvic peritoneum, or even as high up as in the umbilicus, and or on the walls of the intestine, especially the colon. So they can be present majority of the time in the pelvic regions, but sometimes even as far away as into the colon, in the umbilicus, and very, very rarely they may be there in the nasal mucosa as well. Fine. So now it is normal endometrial glands, normal histology of the stroma, but present in an ectopic location. So what will happen? Normal endometrial glands and stroma respond to the hormones, cyclical hormonal changes which occur in a woman's body. So that means when the estrogen is there in the early phase, so there will be proliferation of these glands and stroma. And when progesterone takes over after the ovulation, there will be secretory changes in the stroma. And when both the hormones are waning off, there will be shedding of the endometrium. As a result, in these areas which started as a small amount of glands and stroma, it will undergo these cyclical changes even if it is located outside the uterus. So there will be areas of hemorrhage which will form in these, in the pouch of Douglas, in the colon, ovaries, or fallopian tube, and those hemorrhage will keep on accumulating and form large irregular cyst-like spaces which will be filled up with degenerated blood. Okay, so that would be present with degenerated blood. So these, all in these spaces you will form irregular small cystic scarred areas filled with degenerated blood, and when the RBCs get broken down, the hemoglobin will be converted into hemosiderin and we will have hemosiderin deposits. So when that occurs, the surrounding tissue starts showing features of inflammation and fibrosis. So if that all occurs, then there can be fibrosis on top of the bladder wall, fibrosis on the colon, which may present with colonic obstruction. It may be there in the ovaries, present with cystic changes in the ovaries. There can be strict fibrosis and stricture of the fallopian wall tubes or in the pelvic peritoneum. In pelvic peritoneum, because there is a lot of empty space, so there will be too much of fibrosis and it looks like it has completely fibrosed the pelvic peritoneum, leading to frozen pelvis. Clear? And then I mentioned that they can go as far as the nasal mucosa. So what will happen in the nasal mucosa? So when the patient is having menstruation and she's bleeding and the blood is coming out from the through the vagina, so the menstruation, the bleeding also occurs from the nasal cavity. Fine. So that is called as the menstruation vicarious menstruation. So that is bleeding. We think it is an epistaxis, but if you take carefully a history, she will always say that the epistaxis is occurring at the time of the menstrual period. So that is a very unusual condition, which is called as the vicarious menstruation. But interesting to know because sometimes it can come as a question for your PG entrance examination. Fine. So what is endometriosis? Endometriosis, though the name is similar to endometritis, do not confuse it with endometritis. It is presence of endometrial glands and stroma in abnormal location outside the uterus, and those endometrial glands and stroma are normal appearing. Fine. So whatever changes occur in the normal endometrial glands and stroma in the uterus can occur in the other sites also, but because the drainage cannot occur during the menstruation, they will keep accumulating over. So they will appear like red, blue to yellow, brown nodules with fibrosis and adhesions. In the ovary, that altered blood which occurs, it is called as the chocolate cyst. And when do we diagnose endometritis? When we see endometrial glands, endometrial stroma, and hemosiderin pigment, which is an evidence of repeated bleeding occurring and hemoglobin converting into hemosiderin. So do we need to see all these three features? No. Even if we see two of these features, we are happy to call it endometriosis. Is that fine with you all? You can keep typing your questions. I will take all the questions in the end. So one can understand it, because once you have understood, these terms will seem very, very simple. So now if this endometriosis is going outside the uterus, can it occur inside the myometrium also? Maybe it has not got space to go just outside the uterus, but it is involving only the myometrium. Then it is called as endometriosis interna, also called as adenomyosis. So what will we see in endometriosis? We will find endometrial gland, endometrial stroma in an ectopic site. Like over here, we are seeing it in umbilical nodule. Okay. So why does it occur? Why does it go beyond the uterus? One is that when the menstruation is occurring, some part of the endometrial glands and stroma, rather than coming out through the cervix and vagina, have gone into both the fallopian tubes, which are in direct continuity with the lumen of the uterus, and they may come out from the fimbrial end of the fallopian tubes outside and can get lodged on the surface of the ovaries. They can get lodged in the pelvic peritoneum. They can go into the pouch of Douglas, in the surrounding areas of the pelvic peritoneum, on the wall of the bladder, urinary bladder, on the wall of the colon or the intestine. So that can be easily explained by the regurgitation theory, which is very simple to understand. The other explanation which has been given is probably during the time of the menstruation only, or otherwise it finds its space into the endometrial vessels, the vessels which are there in the endometrium or at the endomyometrial junction. So it goes through the vessels and the lymphatics and can disseminate widely. So that will explain your occurrence in faraway sites like present as the umbilical nodule or in the nasal cavity or other parts of the body. The third theory which has been proposed is that all these are formed by the same cells, whether it is the cervical epithelium or the endometrial epithelium, so probably, or the pelvic peritoneal lining. So maybe there is a metaplasia occurring, which means one mature type of epithelium getting converted to other mature type, and it is not a regurgitation which is occurring in the pouch of Douglas. The same lining epithelial cells are getting converted into endometrial type of epithelial cells. So that is the metaplastic theory which has been proposed. The fourth theory which has been proposed is, no, the cells are stem cells, so they can differentiate into other types of cells. So even in the other sides of the body, it is the cells which are differentiating as normal endometrial cells. So that is the fourth type of theory, which has the fourth explanation which has been proposed. So generally this can come as a short note to you, but it is interesting to find out what makes it do. How can endometriosis, normal endometrial glands and stroma occur at other sites? So the plausible explanations which have been given are, possibly there is regurgitation, which makes sense, or they are disseminating through the vascular or the lymphatic dissemination theory, which can also occur. Then we have read that metaplasia is replacement of one mature type to the other mature type. That is also a plausible theory. And the other line of investigators think that they are all arising from the stem cells, which can show a pluripotency epithelium. Fine. So these are the four explanations which have been given for occurrence of endometriosis. Then now what influences the endometriosis? Probably it occurs under the genetic influences, we don't know. So all these are still query that the other influences could be under the hormone or humoral influences, all immune influences, because all women do not get it. But some get it and may also be occurring in some families. So we really do not know which are the other influences. These are only the proposed explanations which are there. There's still much research is going on to finding out the causes of endometriosis at the other sites. Now, what does the lady present with? She generally presents when she is in her third to fourth decade of life. So generally around 30 to 40 years of age, and there is extreme pain during menstruation. So there is dysmenorrhea. So she has painful menstrual cycle. There is evidence of low back pain and pelvic pain. There is difficulty in urination because of the fibrosis occurring on top of the bladder, or the patient, because there is pelvic fibrosis occurring, so it may entrap the fallopian tube and the patient is unable to conceive because the ovum cannot pass from the ovary to the fallopian tube and then into them. Fine. So these are the various clinical manifestations which can occur. She may present with dysmenorrhea. Dysmenorrhea occurs because the bleeding is occurring and in closed spaces which is present, and it is not able to come out. In the uterine, at the normal site, the shedding endometrium is coming out through the vagina and being drained out of the body. While over here it is getting accumulated, leading to fibrosis and chronic inflammation, and that leads to pelvic pain, and that may lead to intense fibrosis and menstrual irregularities and infertility. So these are the common manifestations which the patient may come to you with. And when you do an examination on ultrasound or by colposcopic examination, you can do a hysteroscopic examination and find out what are the changes which are occurring in the pelvis, and lead to diagnosis by doing a biopsy. And the biopsy will show presence of normal looking endometrial glands and stroma and hemosiderin pigment with altered blood occurring over there, which is the endometriosis. So cyclical menstrual changes will occur at the ectopic endometrial foci, leading to periodic bleeding on those sites, and that periodic bleeding will lead to fibrosis and inflammation surrounding it, presenting with pelvic pain and infertility. Now, is ectopic endometrium completely normal, or it is somewhat different from the normal endometrium? Now, it has been said that this pain, pelvic pain and low back pain which occurs is because of the release of the pro-inflammatory and other factors, especially prostaglandin E2, interleukin 6, interleukin 8, tumor necrosis factor, and matrix metalloproteinases. So those all factors in addition not only lead to pain and inflammatory processes. So as a result, when you prescribe anti-inflammatory drugs, the patient has a relief in the pain. Right? The other is the presence of excess of aromatase enzyme, which is being secreted by the endometrial stromal cells, which leads to increased survival and persistence of endometrial tissue. One can always argue that the endometrial tissue was there and it should have been shed off after one menstrual cycle or two menstrual cycles. Why does it keep on persisting for many years over there? That is probably because there is excess estrogen being secreted by the aromatase enzyme, and the treatment which is being proposed is give the aromatase inhibitors, which may help in doing a non-surgical treatment for this endometriotic tissues, which will help in reducing the fibrosis and may even help in reversing the fibrosis. Right? So the new research which is saying is the fact that it is the endometrial glands and stroma are persisting, they are not getting finished off after 1, 2 or 3 menstrual cycle. It is only getting worsening after every menstrual period. So we have to find the cause, and the cause has been found. The proposed hypothesis is the increased release of pro-inflammatory factors and excess of estrogen, which leads to persistent survival of the endometrium. Fine. So hopefully you will find more of it. Now, adenomyosis, as I have told you, is endometriosis interna. That means the presence of endometrial glands and stroma are present in the myometrium only. They are not going beyond the myometrium. When they go beyond the myometrium outside the uterus, we call it endometriosis. When they are present within the depth of the myometrium away from the endomyometrial junction, then we call it adenomyosis. So there should be at least one low power field away from the normal endomyometrial junction deep into the myometrium, surrounded by the myometrial bundles, and that is called as the adenomyosis. This leads to asymmetrical hyperplasia of the uterus around the adenomyotic foci. There are presence of small hemorrhagic cysts present in the myometrium, and this is likely cause of dysmenorrhea, which increases with with every subsequent cycle. Say the patient is 30, now she started having adenomyosis and endometriosis. So initially, the first 2, 3, 4, 5 months, it would be a mild pain. Now, with every cycle, there is more fibrosis, more inflammatory cells, persistence of this ectopic endometrium. So the amount of pain keeps on increasing as she goes towards her late 30s and 40s. So dysmenorrhea keeps on increasing in subsequent cycle in adenomyosis. So that was about presence of ectopic endometrial glands and stroma in the myometrium, which is adenomyosis, and outside the uterus, which is the endometriosis. Are we okay till now? So as I see, there are no more questions. So I'll go on to the next part of my session. What is an ovulatory cycle? If the ovulation has not occurred, that is called as the anovulatory cycle. So can that occur? It can occur. Lack of ovulation may occur because of certain endocrine disorders. It can be because of certain primary lesions of the ovary, in metabolic disturbances. And if you are not able to explain and find a cause, we call it an iatrogenic cause. Now, what will this lead to? There is no development of progesteronic phase. So that means the estrogenic stimulation of the endometrium is persistent. So under the estrogenic phase, the endometrium was showing proliferation of the glands and stroma. So if there is a continuous proliferation of the glands and stroma, so there will be excess of proliferation and increased number of cells will be called as hyperplasia. So there will be more number of cells because mitosis is occurring in the epithelium of the endometrial glands. So more number of cells that will lead to hyperplasia of the endometrium. So prolonged estrogenic stimulation without development of a proliferative progesteronic phase will lead to excessive proliferation of the endometrial glands, and that will lead to endometrial hyperplasia. Right? So the consequence would be endometrial hyperplasia in anovulatory cycles. What happens if there is progesteronic phase, but it has occurred late? So in such conditions, there will be inadequate corpus luteum function. There is a prolonged estrogenic phase, but inadequate luteal phase, inadequate progesteronic phase. So in such conditions, the patient will be presenting with either menorrhagia or amenorrhea, because of the late inadequate corpus luteum function, and the endometrium is not suitable for implantation even if fertilization has occurred. So luteal phase has occurred, that means ovulation has occurred. Even if that ovum gets fertilized, to be able to implant in the endometrium, it should be having a adequate milieu to cause implantation of the endometrium. So inadequate secretory phase of the endometrium will lead to an endometrium which is not capable of letting the endometrium implant the ovum which has been formed, and that can be diagnosed by looking at the hormonal profile, by doing the hormone assay during the luteal phase. So one can do the estrogen and the progesterone levels, see what are the levels, and the LH levels, luteinizing hormone levels in the LH phase. And when you do an endometrial biopsy, say by dates, she started the day 1 of her menstruation on 1st September. So by 14 September, 15 September, she should have ovulated. While when you are doing a biopsy on the 27th day, the endometrial biopsy is still showing features of 17th day endometrium. So that shows there is inadequate luteal phase. The secretory changes are not well developed. So a more than 2 days difference between the chronological date and histological date is called as the inadequate luteal phase or luteal phase defect, and the patient may present with menstrual abnormalities and infertility. So clear? So what happens when there is excessive estrogenic stimulation? There is endometrial hyperplasia, and the hyperplastic endometrium, because it will not be sustained by a simultaneous increase in the vessels, it will shed out, and there will be menorrhagia in the proliferative phase. So endometrial hyperplasia will show menorrhagia in proliferative phase. And excessive proliferation will lead to atypical hyperplasia, and that may be a seat of further development of a endometrial carcinoma. So why are we scared of having endometrial hyperplasia going on for so long? Not only leads to menorrhagia. So excessive menorrhagia, the patient could be losing large amount of blood and may present to you with severe anemia. So she may have complications because of the severe anemia, but also because there can be atypical hyperplasia and subsequent development of neoplasm of the endometrial glands called as the endometrial carcinoma. So patients with excessive prolonged estrogenic phase and a low progesteronic phase are more prone to develop endometrial hyperplasia, atypical hyperplasia subsequently progressing on to endometrial carcinoma, which could be there. So when does she present to you with? She presents usually around the perimenopausal age, between the ages of 45 to 50 years in the usual conditions, or in a young patient when there has been a persistent anovulation. Say from the time she attained the puberty, there has been a persistent anovulatory cycle. So after 10, 15, 20 years, she would be presenting with endometrial hyperplasia. So she would come to you with endometrial hyperplasia even in her early 30s. So if a young lady who has had persistent anovulation will come at that time, otherwise the usual time period when we diagnose is when there is hormonal abnormalities occurring in the perimenopausal phase, when there is endometrial hyperplasia. So which are the patients who are prone to excessive estrogenic phase? those who have polycystic ovarian disease. Polycystic ovarian disease syndrome, or PCOD, is the one in which there are persistent anovulatory cycles, no progesteronic phase. So under excessive estrogenic stimulation, it leads to endometrial hyperplasia. Or there are ovarian tumors which are secreting estrogen. So functional tumors of the ovary, especially the tumors arising from the stromal cells which secrete estrogen, like the granulosa cell tumor, will lead to endometrial hyperplasia. Normally, the hormones are secreted by the stromal cells of the ovary. So if there is a ovarian cortical stromal hyperplasia, then also the patient can have endometrial hyperplasia. It may be none of the endogenous causes. Patient is perimenopausal or menopausal and is on estrogen replacement therapy. Fine, to overcome the menopausal symptoms. So if she was having excessive menopausal symptoms and we have given a hormone replacement therapy or estrogen replacement therapy in a perimenopausal women, so such patients will also be prone to endometrial hyperplasia. Very, very uncommonly, a woman who is receiving anti-estrogen therapy for her breast cancer, which was estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, carcinoma breast, which was estrogen receptor positive, she would receive tamoxifen therapy, which is anti-estrogen for breast cancer, but it has a pro-estrogenic effect on the endometrial glands. So the tamoxifen has a pro-estrogenic effect on the endometrial glands, but it has an anti-estrogenic effect on the breast carcinoma. So such patients may also develop endometrial hyperplasia and uncommonly may lead on to endometrial carcinoma. So how do we classify endometrial hyperplasia? Endometrial hyperplasia is classified as low-grade hyperplasia and high-grade hyperplasia, which can be simple hyperplasia in which there is only mild glandular proliferation and stroma is not that much. Stroma is still adequately present, not causing much of hyperplasia. There is only 2 to 3 layer epithelium changes which is occurring. In high-grade hyperplasia, there can be so much of hyperplasia that the cells proliferate within the glandular lumina, leading to formation of papillary structures. The glands are placed back-to-back arrangement of each other. As a result, there is not much space for the stroma. The stroma decreases, the glands increase, so the glandular stromal ratio is in favor of the glands, more of gland and less of stroma. So that is called as a marked hyperplasia. If the cells start showing excessive mitosis, nuclear hyperchromasia, atypia, elongation of nuclei, and increased nuclear chromatin features are there, then we call it atypical hyperplasia. It is the atypical hyperplasia which is the most dangerous and most likely to progress to malignancy. So the latest classification for endometrial hyperplasia is whether it is a non-atypical hyperplasia or atypical hyperplasia, because that is what matters for her management. Right? This is previously, it is all because of the histological features. Now we know even histologically, we only have to comment on whether there is nuclear atypia or not. If it is not atypia, we call it non-atypical hyperplasia. And if it is atypical hyperplasia, she is more likely to progress onto endometrial carcinoma in situ and frank invasive endometrial carcinoma. So one has to remember whether it is a simple hyperplasia or atypical hyperplasia. Now, which are the conditions which will progress onto carcinoma? So the cases of endometrial hyperplasia which are associated with inactivation of the PTEN gene, which is the phosphatase and tensin homolog gene on chromosome 10, those are the ones which are likely to progress onto endometrial carcinoma, because the same inactivation of PTEN gene is seen in nearly 80% of endometrial carcinoma, while seen in only 20% of endometrial hyperplasia. Then patients who have a fibroma. And when they are malignant, we call them as adenosarcoma or malignant mixed Mullerian tumors. Right? So we will go on to the common ones which are benign, which is the endometrial polyp. If it has a stalk, we call it pedunculated polyp. If it does not have a stalk, we call it a sessile polyp. So generally in endometriums, we get sessile polyps, which are usually single, can be asymptomatic or may present with ulceration, necrosis, and abnormal bleeding, can occur after tamoxifen therapy. They can be formed of functional endometrium or hyperplastic endometrium. So here we can see the section of the uterus. These are the tubes. This is the ovary, and in the endometrial cavity is projecting a polypoidal structure, which is the endometrial polyp. This is a section. You can see this is the myometrium, and this is the polypoidal tissue showing the glands and the stroma. So benign glands and stroma. If it starts showing hyperplasia, then we will report endometrial polyp showing hyperplastic features. Whether it is simple hyperplasia or atypical hyperplasia, we will mention. The other most common tumor with the endometrium, which is formed of smooth muscle cells, and we have read it as the common tumors. We have seen the sections also and specimen also in our general pathology classes, is the leiomyoma, commonly called as fibroid or fibromyoma or myoma in the lay term. It is the most common tumor in women, and generally 25% of women of reproductive age group have this tumor in their uterus. They are all estrogen responsive. So they will increase in size during pregnancy and regress post-menopausal. They may regress so much that dystrophic calcification can occur, and they may not be required to remove it at all. So they may become smaller in size post-menopausally and may lead to dystrophic calcifications, also called as the womb stones. Womb is the common lay term for the uterus, and so they are called as the stones which are occurring. This is the specimen which you have seen over here. So this is the uterus. You can see this is the cervix, this is the endometrial lining, this is the myometrium, and this part of the myometrium is showing a circumscribed proliferation, whorled proliferation of smooth muscles, which is shiny and giving a silk-like shine appearance, so called as the raw silk cut appearance. So it is projecting into the endometrial cavity, so it is just beneath the mucosal lining, so called as the submucosal endometrial leiomyoma, submucosal leiomyoma. So it can become large, the uterus can become distorted. It is sharply circumscribed, but it is not encapsulated. It is quite circumscribed, but there is no encapsulation. It is round, it is firm. The size may be less than a centimeter to, it may be 10 to 15 centimeter in size. Most commonly occurs in the uterine myometrium. Uncommonly, it can be there in the muscle of the cervix and in the uterine ligaments. So where does it arise from? Probably from the myometrial smooth muscle cells, or it can arise from the smooth muscle cells of the tunica media of the blood vessels in the myometrium. That also has smooth muscle cells. So these are the two proposed sites of origin. When it is present within the myometrium, we call it intramural. When it is present just beneath the endometrium, we call it submucosal. And as the name suggests, these would be presenting with abnormal uterine bleedings because they will be prone to inflammation and ulceration. When it is present just beneath the parametrium, we call it subserosal. And these are the ones which may present with uterine abdominal lumps if they become very large in size. And when they become very large in size, they may disconnect from the uterus. They may be attached to the uterus with a single peduncle when they may be pedunculated like fibroid or leiomyoma, or they may become disconnected and may start wandering off into the pelvis and get attached to some other body part in the other site in the pelvis, say on the colon or on the urinary bladder, when it is called as the parasitic leioma. So here again we can see another single large leiomyoma projecting into the endometrial cavity. This is the cervix and this is the endometrial cavity. So this large leiomyoma with a shiny whorled appearance, there is no hemorrhage, no necrosis. So it is whorled smooth muscle bundles, which we have all made of uniform size and shape, do not show mitosis. If at all mitosis is there, it is less than 10 per 10 high power field. So less than 1 mitosis in a high power field may be seen, but it is generally not seen at all. So we can see these smooth muscle bundles which are intersecting at various angles to each other, formed of smooth muscle cells. So no mitosis, no atypia. They can undergo atrophy. They can undergo fibrosis. They can undergo cystic change. Sometimes there can be a fatty transformation, fatty metaplasia or adipose tissue metaplasia which can occur. More commonly, it undergoes dystrophic calcification. Fine. This is a leiomyoma which underwent infarction during pregnancy, and so this is called as the red degeneration. It appears red, large, suffused, and undergoes complete necrosis. This is the cervix. This is the part of the uterus which is showing a large leiomyoma showing red degeneration, and red degeneration can occur during pregnancy. So these patients may be completely asymptomatic if it is an intramural or subserosal leiomyoma. Those which have a submucosal leiomyoma may present with menorrhagia. The ones which have very large leiomyomas may cause pressure symptoms on the bladder, so there may be increased frequency of micturition. A sudden torsion or sudden hemorrhage into the leiomyoma may present with acute pelvic pain in the lower pelvis, in the pelvic region, or if it is impinging into the endometrial cavity, it will not allow the fertilized ovum to implant. So the patient may not be able to conceive, or if it has implanted, because it is occupying so much space, it will not give space for the fetus to grow. So that may lead to recurrent abortions. And during pregnancy, there may be either spontaneous abortions or fetal malformations or red degeneration. So this is the large one which is showing a red degeneration. This is a large one which is infiltrating into the myometrium. So once it starts infiltrating into the myometrium, think of a malignant tumor, and the biopsy will show frequent atypical mitosis, hyperchromasia of the nuclei, and this is a leiomyosarcoma. So when the cells appear malignant with hyperchromatic nuclei, high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, then we call it a leiomyosarcoma. The mitosis would generally be more than 10 per 10 hyper field, but generally it is so brisk that in every field you will be able to see 3 to 4 mitosis. Hyperchromatic nuclei, variation in the shape and size of the nuclei, so that is called as the pleomorphism. And as we know about sarcomas, they can spread through blood vessels or hematogenous spread is there, while carcinomas generally spread through lymphatics, sarcomas spread through blood vessels, and the 5-year survival is just 40%. So it's a very aggressive tumor, leiomyosarcoma. Now coming on to endometrial carcinoma, which will be a malignant tumor of the endometrial glands. So carcinoma we know is a malignant tumor of the epithelial cells. When it is arising from the endometrial epithelial cells, we call it endometrial carcinoma. Arising from the glands, we know it will form adenocarcinoma. Glandular carcinoma, so adenocarcinomas will be the most common ones. In our country, carcinoma cervix is still more common than carcinoma endometrial, while in many countries where we do a screening for the carcinoma cervix by exfoliative cytology using pap smear, there we are diagnosing lesions of the cervix in a pre-invasive state in the carcinoma in situ or intraepithelial carcinoma, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, CIN1 and 2 stage. So treatment can be done at that stage. So invasive carcinomas of the cervix in Western countries is decreasing, while because we still do not have that much of screening programs, we are still having carcinoma cervix more than carcinoma endometrium. Now, carcinoma endometrium generally occurs in the post-menopausal age group, usually occurs above 55 years of age. Those women who are nulliparous, have excessive estrogen, polycystic ovarian disease, prolonged anovulatory cycles, have a late menopause and early menarche. So that means who have a prolonged, the endometrium has been exposed to hormones for a long time. So those are the women in which endometrial carcinoma will be more common. Then association, certain families, the family history should be taken. And because it is associated with estrogenic phase, estrogenic profile, excessive hyperestrogenism, so patient may even have a concomitant carcinoma breast occurring at the same time or occurring lately. So look out for family history, look out for women who are nulliparous, who have an early menarche and late menopause, those who have persistent anovulatory cycles, women with polycystic ovarian syndrome, those who are obese, because even in the postmenopausal phase, the adipose tissue keeps forming the estrogen, even though the source of estrogen from ovary is not there. The other associations which are there in endometrial carcinoma is diabetes mellitus, women who are hypertensive and who are infertile. So infertility, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, family history are the risk factors associated with carcinoma endometrium. As I have said, there is excessive estrogen stimulation, which means early menarche, late menopause, estrogen replacement therapy, estrogen secreting ovarian tumors. So that is why, though it is associated all with estrogens, if the patient has ovarian agenesis, that means no estrogen, so there will be endometrial carcinoma will be rare in those women who have ovarian agenesis or early ovarian failure. Right? In cases of early ovarian failure, there will be rarity of the endometrial carcinomas because the endometrium lining is not responding to it. The precursor lesion is atypical hyperplasia of the endometrium. So atypical endometrial glandular hyperplasia is the precursor lesion which may progress on to endometrial carcinoma. Now, what are the genetic mutations which are associated with? As I told you before, it is the same pathway which is involved with the endometrial hyperplasia. So it is said that the hyperplasia may be a precursor of carcinoma along with PTEN mutation, which is seen in nearly 30 to 80% of patients with endometrial carcinoma. While mutation in the PIK3CA gene is seen in nearly 40%. So it is seen that though PTEN mutation is occurring in far more conditions than in the PIK3 gene, so it may play a role in invasion of the tumor, but may not be seen in hyperplasia. So we got hyperplasia. In hyperplasia conditions, we got PTEN mutations, while mutations in PI3K gene will be associated with invasion. So those patients will be more associated with high-grade tumors. The other mutations which can be involved are the KRAS mutations, Iridia mutations, loss of function mutation in Iridia gene in 30% cases, and mismatch repair genes may be involved, like in colonic carcinoma, DNA mismatch repair gene, MMR genes, in 20% of the cases. In type 2 endometrial carcinomas, which are the poorly differentiated ones or the serous type of endometrial carcinomas, P53 mutation is found in nearly 50% of those cases. So P53 mutation is associated with type 2 endometrial carcinoma, while type 1 endometrial carcinoma is associated with PTEN mutation. Right? So P53 mutations in large number of cases in serous carcinomas in nearly 90% of the cases. So this is a specimen of the uterus. Above is the uterus fundus. This is the cervix. As we can see, the cervix is fine. There is no growth in the cervix. Even the lower uterine junction, the border of the cervix and the endometrium, which is the uterine isthmus, it's not showing any growth, while there is a growth which is involving the entire endometrial cavity in the uterine fundus. Fine. So we should be able to see the uterine growth, which can be proliferative type. Sometimes it could be infiltrative type or ulcerative type. So the three gross morphologies of the endometrial carcinoma could be proliferative or fungating, when it is occupying the lumen, or it could be leading to ulcerating of the lining, or it could be infiltrative growth into the myometrium. That would be the gross morphological types. Microscopically, 85% of them are adenocarcinomas. So of the uterine carcinoma malignancies, 85% are adenocarcinomas, and type 1 are the most common, which are called as the endometrioid adenocarcinomas. If there is a benign squamous element associated with the endometrial carcinoma, which is the adenocarcinoma with benign squamous epithelial cell, we call it adenoacanthoma. In case there is both glandular as well as squamous cells, both are malignant. Squamous cells are also malignant and glandular cells are also malignant. Then we term the carcinoma as adenosquamous carcinoma. If the carcinoma is showing papillae formation with a fibrovascular core and lined by tall columnar epithelial cells with ciliated lining, then we call it as a papillary serous carcinoma, which is also called as the type 2 carcinoma. A very rare form of carcinoma is when the cell shows extreme degree of cytoplasmic clearing. So cytoplasm appears almost pale, pink or cleared out. So that is called as the clear cell sarcomas, clear cell carcinomas. Both papillary serous carcinomas and clear cell carcinomas are aggressive in nature as compared to adenocarcinoma, endometrioid adenocarcinomas, which have a better prognosis. So another specimen of uterus, we can see both the cervical lips, anterior as well as posterior lips of the cervix, and endocervical lining is fine. This is the proliferating fungating growth which is occupying the entire endometrial cavity and almost trying to come towards the lower uterine junction. So we should be aware and tell how much is the growth, which part of the uterus it is involving, whether the lateral wall, the anterior wall, the posterior wall, or involving the entire one, and look out for its invasion into the myometrium. And simultaneously, one should search for pelvic endometrial pelvic lymph nodes and look out for it. So the gross morphological types to recapitulate are, it could be polypoidal, it could be ulcerative, or it could be infiltrative into the wall. If all the cells are forming glands and the solid component, non-glandular component is only less than 5%, we call it grade 1 carcinoma or well-differentiated endometrioid carcinoma. Fine. If half of them are glands, but 5 to 50% are solid elements which are not forming glands, then we call it moderately differentiated or grade 2 endometrioid carcinoma. If the solid component not forming glands is more than 50%, then we call it a poorly differentiated carcinoma. Here we can see, you can see so many glandular luminas which are everywhere present, and they are going into the myometrial smooth muscle bundles. So this is an invasive endometrial carcinoma forming large number of glands. So it was a well differentiated carcinoma. Now, how do the carcinomas spread? They can spread directly into the underlying myometrium. So myometrial invasion can occur. It can go into the parametrium, and then it can go into the periuterine structures. Fine. So that is a direct spread of the endometrial carcinomas. It can go through the tubal lumina into the fallopian tube and then can form drops of the tumor cells can drop into the peritoneum, and peritoneal deposits may occur, similar to what we had proposed was a regurgitation theory in endometriosis. So here the tumor is coming out of the fallopian tube fimbria and lodging itself onto the peritoneal structures, maybe on top of the ovary in the pouch of Douglas. So that is another way of spread to the pelvic peritoneum. The first is it can go into the periuterine structures by penetrating through the myometrium, or it can go via the fallopian tube, finding the empty lumina and go out. It will spread along the lymphatics and go to the lymph nodes in the pelvis. The obturator lymph nodes, the internal and the external obturator lymph nodes are the most common. Or it can spread through the blood vessels, where it may go to the lungs. You can have metastatic deposits in the liver, or you can have metastatic deposits in the bone. So these are the various methods by which it can spread. Fine. So when it has spread outside the true pelvis in various organs, we call it stage 4. It has gone outside the uterus, but it has not gone beyond the true pelvis. So it is still involving only the pelvic organs, maybe the urinary bladder, maybe the pouch of Douglas, the ovaries. So it is still stage 3. When the tumor is involving the cervix, uterus, of course, it is involving the cervix also, then we call it stage 2. But if it is involving only the uterus, not gone into the cervix, then we call it stage 1. So the earliest stages, it is confined only to the uterus. When it has gone beyond the uterus into the cervix, we call it stage 2. When it has gone outside the uterus but not outside the true pelvis, we call it stage 3. And when it has gone outside the true pelvis, it is stage 4. Fine. So that is how we stage and grade. Stage is the extent of the tumor, and the grade was the differentiation, how well it resembles the normal endometrial glands. So if it is almost all of them are forming glands, we call it well differentiated. Nearly half are forming glands, we call it moderately differentiated. If more than half is there, more than 75% is formed of poorly differentiated solid proliferations of cells, we call it poorly differentiated. So you should know what is the difference between the grade. Grade is how well it resembles the normal glandular structures, and stage is extent of spread to the surrounding structures. So this is the common thing which we will keep on hearing in the cervix, in the uterus, in the lung. Everywhere we have taught you what is grade and stage, and this is what the grade and stage means. So here I will stop. So any questions from this you can ask me now, or I will be there for the next session also, and I will be there to answer all your questions in the next session if you think of any question later on. So more than 200 students, I can't see any questions. Or maybe you are all so tired after reaching home. I hope you have had lunch after you have reached home. It has been a rainy day throughout. I'm glad you have all reached home and your hostels and be able to log in. So either I was too fast, nobody has understood anything. So to recapitulate, we did the normal histology of the endometrium in the proliferative phase. Then we went on to the early secretory phase when ovulation has occurred. There are subnuclear vacuolations. And then we have the full-fledged secretory phase when we have the tortuous glands with secretions inside the lumina. Then we went on to acute endometritis, which could be because of the hematogenous spread, or it could be ascending infection from vagina going on to cervix and going into the endometrial cavity. It could be acute inflammation or chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation could be non-specific chronic inflammation due to other bacteria, or it could be mycobacterial chronic inflammation when we can see epithelioid cell granulomas, and it could be a cause of infertility. So generally, when we are diagnosing endometritis or tubercular endometritis, we take a premenstrual biopsy so that the granulomas have not yet shed with the shedding endometrium in the menstrual phase. And simultaneously, you should also do a culture for Mycobacterium tuberculosis when you are suspecting tuberculosis in a woman who is presenting especially with infertility. Fine. Then we talked about a similar looking name, which was endometriosis. It is not inflammation. It is presence of ectopic glands and stroma, endometrial glands and stroma at an ectopic site, which could be in the pelvic peritoneum, in pouch of Douglas, on the ovaries, in the fallopian tube, on the wall of the colon, or in the umbilicus, at various other sites in the body, and can present with various manifestations, generally with severe dysmenorrhea, pelvic fibrosis, frozen pelvis, and infertility. Then we talked about the polycystic ovarian disease, which can present with anovulatory cycles, and that can lead to endometrial hyperplasia because of excessive estrogen stimulation, and other conditions which can have excessive estrogen due to functional tumors of the ovary, or because of the hormone replacement therapy, or because the woman itself she has had an early menarche at a young age of say 10-11 years and has still not had menopause till the age of 50-55 years, then there is a long period, or she is nulliparous because the progesteronic phase during the pregnancy which occurs has not occurred in her. So all can lead to excessive estrogen, and the patient can have other estrogen dependent tumors also, like fibroadenoma and carcinoma breast and leiomyomas. So atypical endometrial hyperplasia can predispose to carcinomas, and both of them can show mutations in the PTEN gene and association with Cowden syndrome in PTEN gene, which is the germline mutation in PTEN gene, may have simultaneous carcinomas of more than one site. So carcinomas occurring on the background of hyperplasia are type 1 carcinomas, and type 2 carcinomas are the one which occur on the background of atrophic endometrium, which would be present. And so the type 2 carcinomas, which are the serous carcinomas and the clear cell carcinomas, are more aggressive as compared to the type 1 endometrioid adenocarcinomas. Depending upon the differentiation, we can grade them as grade 1, 2, or 3, and depending upon their extent of invasion into the uterus, cervix, out of the uterus into the pelvis and outside the pelvis, we call them stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. Then classifying the tumors of the uterus. Uterus has endometrium and uterus has myometrium. Tumors of myometrium are benign tumors, which are the leiomyomas, and malignant tumors, which is the leiomyosarcoma. Tumors of the endometrium has glands and endometrium has stroma. So from the glands we have endometrial polyps, and from the glands we have malignant tumors, which are the endometrial carcinomas. From the stroma we have stromal nodule and stromal sarcomas. I have not taken them up because they are not really very important for you, but for classification purposes, you should know that the benign proliferating nodular area of the endometrial stroma is called as the endometrial stromal nodule, or the malignant tumor of the endometrial stromal cells will be called as the endometrial stromal sarcomas. Then we have the mixed Mullerian tumors, which can have differentiation towards both glandular epithelial component as well as stromal component. If the gland is benign and stroma is malignant, we call it adenosarcoma. If both are benign, we call it adenofibroma. If both are malignant, we call it carcinosarcoma or malignant mixed Mullerian tumor. So that means there would be carcinoma and fibrosarcoma. So that will be malignant mixed Mullerian tumor. So simple, easy to remember. Don't get confused. If there is any confusion, I'm still here. You can ask me questions or later on in the next session. So as I'm getting no questions, okay, one question was there in post-abortal condition, which type of endometritis is seen? Generally, acute endometritis. The patient will come with acute pain abdomen, irregular menstrual cycle. Can endometriosis be considered as a choriostoma? Logically, yes, but the term used is endometriosis. So thank you all. I'll leave and close the session. So we'll meet again for the next session. Hello. Good evening. हाँ जी सर.